Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name's Yvonne Harrison, and I'm delighted to be hosting this afternoon's webinar, celebrating, of course, International Women's Day. Now, the theme is Break the Bias, and like I say, we're very grateful. Busy days, so to join us is absolutely fantastic. Now, imagine a world with equal gender equality, a world free from bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. A world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and where difference is both valued and celebrated. Together, we can push for progress, and collectively, we can break the bias. Your panel today is absolutely fantastic. It's filled with incredible, inspirational women who've chosen to challenge, to push the boundaries, to pave the way, and have excelled in their respective careers in football. We hope their stories will inspire you and challenge yourselves and the people around you to continue to push those biases, not only for International Women's Day, of course, but every single day. If you've tuned into our events before, a massive thank you to you for returning to us. And if you're tuning in for the first time, thank you so much. You're very welcome. And I know you're going to have a fantastic hour with us today. Just so you're aware, we have an unbelievable chat function on today, which is live. We will activate that halfway through the session. So please make sure you introduce yourself to one another and ask any questions of our panel. I will get to as many as I can, I promise you. Finally, just so you're aware, the webinar is being recorded today. So you can come back to the content. You can share it with colleagues, and you'll find that on our YouTube channel in the coming days, along with all of the previous webinars that we have filmed. So it's a really great one-stop shop for all things around women in football. Just so you're aware, we are on social media today with our Women in Football Twitter handle. We would like you to use, if you are going to join in the conversation, hashtag with webinars, and of course break the bias as well. So please, let's get that conversation going, not only for ourselves but everybody who would love to join us and for whatever reason is not able to today. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce today's panel. First up, we have our very own Ebru Coxwell, who is chair of Women in Football. Now, Ebru's had a very varied career spanning multiple continents and roles. Ebru was the first woman to be elected to the executive board of the European Club Association in 2010, after beginning her career in New York as a financial analyst and holding a number of senior positions, particularly with Galatasaray, including as GM of Galatasaray Sportif AS. She's also a very experienced executive and non-executive director, consultant for a whole range of organisations, including FIFA and UEFA, and has been a real trailblazer for gender equality in football and has been an unbelievable support to me in my early weeks at Women in Football. An inspiring and very successful person and a real individual who's so passionate about the cause of women in football. So Ebru, I've not done you justice there, but honestly, what a career. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wonder if you could just share a little bit with our audience in terms of your journey to date.
Sure, very happy to do that. And welcome once again, Yvonne. We're delighted to have you as our new CEO at Women in Football. My career, as you a little bit alluded to, has taken me from investment banking into football with a turn and twist of events that were completely unplanned. So after 10 years in investment banking, I had joined a private equity firm. My son was 6 months old, and I didn't know, but apparently I was pregnant again. So interesting enough, my new job actually took me to a meeting with Galatasaray because the president of the club at the time was my former M&A client from my finance work. And one thing led to the other. The fund ended up buying 20% shares in Galatasaray. And I guess a discrimination that probably quite a few of our members face. I unfortunately faced that as well as a woman with 2 young children. And I was told that my contract was being terminated because They didn't think that I could keep up with the pace of the fund with two very young children. And I had the option to hire a lawyer and open a court case, or take up the offer of Galatasaray to come in as an interim CFO. I was always a big fan of the club. My father had played basketball for the club. And I thought, okay, my comfort zone is finance, but this is a very interesting potential new field as well. So I came in as an interim CFO in 2000 and ended up staying. So that's been the reason why I came into football. And then 3 months later, I became the managing director of the marketing company. And throughout my 11 years as a professional within Galatasaray, I led many operations, especially building of the new stadium, restructuring of the club's debt. And as CEO, before I left to join the general secretary of the Turkish FA, to join as the general secretary of the Turkish FA, I had a budget of 200 million euros, 600 people reporting to me, 2,500 athletes that were under my responsibility. So it was a big job and a very challenging one as well. And then my adventures took me from the FA to FIFA and UEFA as a consultant. And the last few years, I've been mostly building a portfolio career with several board membership positions, as well as some senior advisor type roles, partly back in finance, but mostly still in football. So that was a little bit my journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable, and the scale when you describe the business in the way that you do, I mean, that it is huge, and I'm sure there's lots that we can learn from your experiences. Now you touched upon it in terms of being a mother of two young children. You know, I have three children, a little bit older now, but still, the eldest being 15, the youngest 11, and you know, it can be challenging juggling a career and a family, but not impossible. And actually, we can absolutely do that. And again, I'm sure many of our members are in that position. In terms of the barriers that you've faced as a female in the industry, particularly looking at those roles that you've had, what have been the main challenges that you faced, and how have you sort of navigated some of those to achieve the successes that you have at Brew?
I guess the biggest challenge was to be questioned all the time about my knowledge and understanding of football and the football business. So not just the, you know, what's happening on the pitch, needless to say, but and in Turkey, as you probably know, it's quite a, you know, macho male dominant country in any case, loves football. Almost, you know, all of the population is crazy about football. And to have a woman lead one of the biggest clubs and then Turkish football was, of course, quite a shock to certain people. And the prejudices always kicked in. And Galatasaray is not a club that is owned by anybody. It is like Real Madrid and Barcelona. It's owned by the members, which means every 2 years there is elections. And each time, you know, a new president came in with 14 other board members, there was always the same question: how come we have a female CEO? And during my time, I worked with 6 different presidents and 10 different boards. So it was quite a lot of men to convince that I actually really know, you know, my material quite well in terms of the football business, where it's going, the regulatory environment, especially the financial fair play regulations were kicking in at the time when I was still with the club. We worked with UEFA and ECA quite closely as one of the pilot clubs to implement them. So the first few weeks and months of this really intensive questioning all the time turned into, wow, she does really know a lot, and she is an invaluable asset to the club, and we need to keep her and benefit from her tremendous knowledge and expertise. So what's worked out extremely well for me has been to be the go-to person for especially certain areas of expertise. In my case, it was, finance, and also, of course, having the contacts in the international scene and all the relationships and the international credibility and the reputation that, of course, comes at the end of the day as, a Galatasaray representative, but then you also need to earn it. Then also in the boardroom, I've been sitting in boardrooms since 2000, not necessarily as a board member, but as the reporting CEO. So it's very sometimes difficult and frustrating not to be the final decision maker. But I always say one of the most important, I think, skills is to be a good influencer and not mind that you were not the decision maker, because behind the scenes, that you were the person who influenced those decisions. Sometimes you don't get the credit for it. That's okay. If it's the outcome you originally, wished for, then by all means, why not?
Yeah, I think that's such a valid point. I can imagine all of our panel relating to the art of negotiation and influence for sure.
Exactly.
And then just thinking about, Ebru, your kind of journey to women in football, how did you first become aware of women in football and ultimately become the chair of this organisation?
Well, we always usually only talk about the successful parts of our careers, but I had a very difficult and dark period as well. My general secretary position at the Turkish FA ended 4 months, 5 days after joining, and it ended very badly with me being put at kind of the spotlight for the whole match fixing investigations that were going on in Turkey at the time. That was year 2011-12, when 11 clubs were implicated for match fixing, and Galatasaray was not one of them. So it was a very difficult period with chaos, and all the club directors fighting each other, reporting to the authorities. And it was inevitable that the female CEO, who came from one club that was not implicated, would be unfortunately targeted. So I started receiving death threats. I was the sort of target of a big social media defamation campaign, and I thought it was the end of the world. I've never been this frustrated in my whole life. So during that period, I felt extremely lonely. I didn't feel that there was any place to go to get some support. And again, I thought I was the only person in the world who was being mistreated in this industry. So when I started working with FIFA and UEFA as a consultant, I came across Women in Football and saw that although it was a UK-based organization, it was actually having international reach as well in terms of advocacy and also trying to help women in the industry facing difficulties like myself. And when in 2015 they had an opening for a director, I applied. I came in, I was selected. And then in 2018, when Anna Kessel, the co-founder, decided to retire and step down, the board unanimously asked me to take over. And I said, under only one condition, I would accept this. We need a CEO. And that's how our wonderful former CEO, Jane Purdon, came in. And I've been now in charge of the organization for 3.5 years. And I can definitely say that the time that I have spent with the organization has probably been the most valuable in my life, knowing that we are making such great impact and helping thousands of women, not just in the UK, but all over the world, to have more courage, to be motivated, to be inspired, to be upskilled, and to demand more from their organizations. But equally, working with the decision makers in these organizations to convince them about the merits of having more diverse senior leadership teams, more diverse boards, and to give equal opportunity of access and progress to the women working in their organizations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ebru. I will be coming back to you for more, but really insightful. And the honesty, I think everyone will really connect with, because that famous line that success does not happen in straight lines. It really doesn't, and I'm sure we all can draw upon experiences, thankfully probably not as traumatic as yours, in terms of the threats that you had in relation to a role and a job that you had is horrific, but certainly the openness and the honesty and the willingness, I think, of women to share their stories to support other people is really compelling. So thank you. Next up, it's actually one of my best friends in the whole world, actually. Someone who I've learned so much from. I've seen firsthand push boundaries, call out wrongdoings, show incredible resilience to forge a very successful career in media. So I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Collins, who is the executive producer at Talk Sport, working with presenters and production teams to create the very best sports radio, and actually brought into a role to really champion diversity and new talent at the station. And I hear firsthand the amazing work that she's doing. Prior to that, Sarah was head of sport at BBC Radio Manchester. I think the only head of sport who was female in the country at the time. She's a founder of Domino's Junior Netball Club, as am I, and actually a season ticket at Manchester City. So you can hold that against her or not. It's up to you, whatever your preferences are. But Sarah, it's great for you to join us. Thank you so much. It would be great if you could just share again a little bit of information about your career journey today.
Thanks, Yvonne. I really appreciate that. Yes. Yeah, I'm a happy season ticket holder at Manchester City. I enjoyed going back to the motherland on Sunday. So bring it on, bring it on. Wow, where to start really? I was really lucky because I knew I wanted to work in the media since I knew what I wanted to do. So the age of 6, 7 and 8, I did my first work placement at a radio station in Manchester. And then weirdly enough, went out with one of the reporters there to Lancashire County Cricket and had to sit in the car because women weren't allowed at this certain place there. So that was at the age of 16. I was exposed to that. Didn't even think anything of it, kind of like I do now looking back. So I knew I wanted to work in radio. I knew I wanted to go to uni. I was very lucky to have a single parent, and my mum supported me going through uni. I came out and eventually got my foot in the door at the BBC in Manchester. But if you're going to talk about boundaries and not discrimination, but boundaries, I had massive boundaries, even just by my accent. Even though I was working at a local radio station, and yet people talked about my accent because I've got a strong North Manchester accent in a Manchester station. So I eventually got a job there. It probably took me 6 years to get a staff job at the BBC, which is unheard of nowadays. You usually get given a staff job after 3 years when you've been freelancing. I worked my way up. I started cleaning cars. I started doing traffic and travel from police headquarters. I was balancing a job as a waitress and coming into the radio station in my work outfit, in a waitressing outfit, and doing everything that I could. But I was really lucky because my first job that I got, which I really enjoyed, was driving the desk of the sports show. And in Manchester, we had 10 football teams. So I just got totally immersed in sport. My dad took me to Manchester City at the age of 8. So I've always had a love of sport. I've never been good at playing it. Founded the netball team just probably because at some point I could have blagged myself onto the first team. So I did founder it, but I'm not a junior. So my background has kind of been working my way up. And then I moved to London to work for BBC Sport on an attachment. That was a real privilege. I was very lucky to do that. It took me about 9 attempts to get that one attachment job. I remember going to London, and luckily for the final interview, when I got there, they said, "We don't even need to meet you at reception to come. You've been here that many times. You're going to get this job." And moved back to Manchester, wanted to buy a house, and was made head of sport at Radio Manchester, which is one of the best jobs ever that I've done in the world. It was hard. I actually had to manage the person who got me my work placement at the BBC. He was a grown man that I looked up to, and then I had to become his manager. He wanted to do that job, but the management team didn't want him to do that job. That was a challenge. And I did probably about 26, 27 years at the BBC, working at Radio Manchester and for Radio 5 Live. And then I left the BBC 3 years ago, and 2 years ago joined Talk Sport to be exec producer. and doing exactly what Yvonne said. It created a brand new role, championing diversity, driving through change, which is hard and challenging because a lot of people don't like change. It's a company where there aren't a lot of females in there, definitely very white faces in talk sport. And I feel like we as a team have changed that, and I've driven that. So yeah, that's a snapshot of the bits of things that I've done.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I think the video that was released on your socials yesterday, Majestic, had written a brilliant piece, and there was a fantastic lady singing on that as well.
Yeah, Hadara Music, she's amazing.
Yeah, it was so good. So we'll be sharing that link from our Women in Football feed as well. Please do check out the video. The song is absolutely awesome. And we'll also be hosting a future Women in Football event from TalkSport HQ, so watch out for that as well. I'm delighted to introduce Simone Pound. Now, Simone is Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the PFA, and I know you have a number of other roles wrapped into that, Simone, as well. The PFA is the world's oldest and largest sporting union. Now, Simone joined the PFA in 2000 and has supported the professionalisation of the women's game ever since. She's also written guidance and toolkits on education programmes for anti-racism, anti-bullying, tackling homophobia, sexual consent, EDI workshops delivered to over 4,000 professional footballers, 92 clubs, and that includes parents, coaches and boards. So what a difference, Simone, you will have made within your career. If that's not enough, an ambassador for Show Racism the Red Card, sits on the Kick It Out board as a trustee, as well as holding a number of incredible roles, and has been really truly inspirational and instrumental in creating change within the football industry. So Simone, a massive job at the PFA, also some really interesting roles, which I hope you'll touch on as well. So can you just give us a little bit of a potted history around your career and also the difference the PFA is making in terms of breaking that bias?
Sure. Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Yvonne. It's great to be involved in this really key and important conversation. So I guess for me, I wasn't necessarily a football fan growing up, but I did have a very staunch West Ham United supporting father. My parents are dual heritage, so my mum's from Jamaica and my dad is white British. So we'd go every Sunday to visit my maternal grandma, who lives in East London, literally a stone's throw from Upton Park, which was of course West Ham's old ground. And when we'd go at the weekend, my dad would go off to the football and we'd stay at home and kind of be with my grandma, and we could hear the game. So I'd always be listening. I could hear if there was a goal, could hear if there was a miss, kind of trying to guess what the score would be when my dad came home. And I remember asking him if I could go. I'm like, can I come with you to the football? Because it was all so exciting. We could trying to find car parking spaces and everything. It was all just the excitement of a match day. And he said no. He was like, no, babe, I can't take you. There's some not very nice people at football. Wouldn't want you to kind of be in the crowd. And I kind of, as a child, obviously accepted it. When I joined the PFA, I've got so many colleagues who were playing football at that time, kind of like 1980s, who experienced the racism that my dad was trying to protect me from. So I think it had, although I wasn't a football fan, it's kind of created a bit of a backdrop and a backstory to my love of the game and the kind of what football can do to create change. So I was fortunate enough to do some work experience at the PFA whilst at uni. So that was kind of like my kind of entry level position. And then again, when Fulham turned pro, because the PFA has always been about representation, and at the time there wasn't that many women working within the organisation at an executive level. So I applied for a job as a kind of commercial executive, but also with a view to supporting Fulham, who were the first professional side, the only professional side, so that it was the days of games of 20-0. And so I kind of was working with players like Rachel Yankee, Katie Chapman, Sasha Duncan, Marianne Spacey was on the squad, and kind of learned about the game and what the PFA can do for them at that time. So that was like 2000. Obviously, a Black woman working in football. I'm not unique. There are other Black women, but there's not that many people who look like me as do. So I was kind of drawn to the work of Kick It Out, and Brendan Batson at the time, who was the deputy CEO, asked me to join him, or invited me to join him to some of the board meetings as he was on the board. So really kind of learn about what Kick It Out was doing again at that time, really to kind of shape and create a more inclusive environment for fans and players in the game. And it was, so I guess the 2010 Equalities Act changed the landscape in terms of kind of the legalities around discrimination. And we were able to, again, because we're a union, kind of shape the work and the dynamic that we'd got. So we kind of created the Equalities Department from around 2001 and was working around player training. And then with the Equalities Act and some incidents that occurred kind of just slightly after that, kind of player-on-player related incidents that were very high profile, that have been well documented and really changed, I think, the face of the game and how the PFA worked with its members and how we kind of worked on discrimination cases. So also since then, we've kind of grown as an organisation and a department. I was a kind of department of one for many years, and I've now got a really great team who do really great work across the board, and we keep going.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And yeah, like you say, there's been a lot of change over that period, and it's great to see the representation increasing, albeit the pace of change across the industry as a whole may not be as accelerated as we would like. Can I just ask, in relation to organisations like Women in Football, you know, why do you think it's important to have an organisation like ours in sort of supporting the industry to move more in terms of this agenda, and what difference do you think we can make in this space?
I think you're already making a massive difference, and I know you've been established for some time, and I think the work that Yvettes done as a chair, Jane before you, Yvonne, and the work that you're doing now has been really, really instrumental and monumental as well in kind of creating a space for women to excel in football. And it's a bit like Kick It Out when it started. By saying kick racism out of football, it was an action. By saying women in football, it's an action. So we know we're here and we're representing. And again, I think kind of being a very staunch unionist, the collective power that you have as a collective, as opposed to working individually, when Yvettes spoke about kind of feeling that she was on her own, but then realizing that she wasn't. I think that's really important. And I think as a collective, we can all do so much, kind of striving for change together.
I think that's such a good point, like power in the numbers, without a shadow of a doubt. And I know personally from my own career, the value, what's the famous saying, your network is your net worth, like this whole notion of surround yourself with amazing people who can really push you on and encourage you when, you know, perhaps when confidence is low, like we've all taken knocks. So that is massively important, and thank you for that. I mean, I've obviously looked at the history of, I've been a member for a long time actually of Women in Football, but looking at the history of where we started to where we are now, and the fantastic work that Jane's done on the board over the last couple of years is immense, and I'm hugely excited for the future, and particularly with the focus on the women's game growing so much as well. I think there's so much that we can do to really transform this industry. Thank you, Simone. I will be coming back to you shortly. So I'm going to move on now to our final guest speaker. Just to let everybody know that's on the webinar, the chat will open after we've spoken to Ariana. So I'm sure you're absolutely chomping at the bit with your questions. The opportunity is coming to ask them, I promise you. So next is a former professional footballer, having finished her career at PSG and now director of women's football at Next Sports, Ariana Crisconi. I hope I got that right.
Thank you, Anne.
I mean, obviously you finished your career at Paris Saint-Germain, and actually at that time, I believe you had a dual role in terms of playing and also as women's sponsorship manager for 2 seasons, prior to which he played in Italy, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Norway, earning several caps in the Italian women's national team, as well as appearance in the UEFA Champions League. Using your experiences now and your creativity, obviously, to help football stakeholders build a sustainable and accelerated blueprints to really raise the women's game. So I'm very, very interested to hear more about kind of your career as an athlete, and in particular that transition. You know, how did you know what it was that you wanted to do, and which direction you kind of wanted to take things in terms of where you are now? So the floor is yours, Ariana.
Thank you guys for having me, and also it's a pleasure to be on the panel with such amazing women, and the network, as you say, now I have a bigger network to share and to learn from. My career path has been quite a bit different. I kind of followed the dem that Ebro talked about that I didn't really know, and it's taken so many twists and turns that I don't know where I'll be in 5 years, and I'm kind of happy that way. But I was extremely lucky to grow up in Southern California, which is a hotbed for women's soccer or women's football now. I also grew up with a family that was very supportive and always promoted my dream to become a professional soccer player, even though that didn't exist in the States or anywhere actually in the world when I was a child. And so I think it's been great that I've had female models and male role models growing up to get where I am today. I played youth soccer in the United States, and then obviously in the States we have a really great system where we can go to university and get great educations off the field and work extremely hard off the field while we're playing on the field. This definitely laid a groundwork for me that while I was playing professionally, I was never just playing professionally. One, because I get a little bored, and two, because financially we were not always paid on time or how we were supposed to be paid. And so rather than ask my parents for help, I got creative in trying to find a way to have an income or just keep being able to do what I loved and what I dreamed of doing. And ironically, it actually wasn't until I was 27 years old that I signed my very first actual professional contract. In my mind, I'd been a professional the whole time, but legally on paper and in the countries I was playing in, I was not a professional player, which was difficult and hard. And luckily, signing that professional contract was the safest thing I've ever done, because a couple of weeks after signing that, I had the biggest injury I've ever had in my career. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my PCL, and both meniscus all at the same time. And had I not been a professional contract, I think my parents would have had to mortgage their house to help me pay for the medical that I needed. But being a professional in France, all of that was covered, and I'm extremely thankful to have been a professional football player when that injury happened and that women were becoming professional players. However, it's really important that I was the only professional player on my team at that moment. All of my teammates were amateurs, as I was the foreigner on the team. So had that injury happened to anybody else on the team, it would not have been the same situation for them, which is frightening to think about, that female players are still going through that today. We have had progress, though. Contrary to Sarah, I would have to look at the bright side, and as a female player, from the first time I came to Europe to now, it's a different world what the women can look up to, the players that they're able to look up to, the see it to be it mentality that we all look for. There are players on TV, there are players on social media, there's much more visibility. When I first started playing in Italy and I said I was a football player, people didn't believe me, or they had really weird questions to ask me. Today, there's a few questions, but it's much more normal to say that. Or when I say I was an ex-professional football player, I don't get strange looks, especially from women. Men are usually excited to know that you played football. Women think you're strange or that there's something wrong with you. Why would you ever want to play a men's sport? So ironically, and we might go into that, the bias I've had, I feel, has actually been more from the female community than the male community. I've been very lucky to have a lot of male allies in my career, coaches, my closest mentors. A lot of people who have guided me have actually been male rather than female. Hopefully that's changing now, as we talked about, but it's actually the females that have deterred my career or actually made me question some of my choices, from questions about sexuality to the question, why am I not a mother yet, and why did I choose my career, or different things like that. I'm going on a little tangent, apologies, but I think it's important to discuss those. But going back to my career, so I played, as you said, in 6 countries. I finished my career amazingly at Paris Saint-Germain, where we were the first ever women's team to win the league and take it away from Lyon. I'm really proud of that one. I will be saying that until I die. But going into Paris Saint-Germain, I actually had my injury. I played in Scandinavia because of the way the seasons worked. It was easier for me to try to come back and see if I could play. I did it. I checked that off my box, that I came back from a big injury when a lot of doctors said I would never be able to run again. But coming back from that, I came back to France. I had found a French partner, and so I wanted to move in and live together and start my off-field career and figure out what I wanted to do next. And I chose to play for a second division team here in France so that I could be with him. And it was not how I wanted to be playing, unfortunately. It was just not the right situation for me personally. And at that moment, I figured, what do I do next? I did not want to be a coach. Another bias that most female players get is that the only thing we can do post-career is coach. Coaching is a passion and a job and something that not most people should be doing. I should not be a coach. So most players, I don't think, should be going into coaching. Coaching is a very specific role that people have a passion for and have the ability to do, and that's just not me. So for me, it's frustrating that people always think that athletes can only be coaches. I don't think we should be. And so again, in this time period, I had to figure out what to do. So I decided to go back to school, and I actually went to the Football Business Academy, and actually Ebru became a bit of a mentor. I don't know if she remembers this or knows this, but she actually spoke to us, and then I reached out to her and I talked about a woman going into business and how I would be able to balance family and sport and all these other things. And so again, the network is huge, and discussing network. But I went to the FBA. That led me to a role in the marketing department at Benfica. Had to finish my degree. What do I do now? I didn't have a team. I wasn't playing football, and I didn't have a job. So I was luckily a mentor of mine, who was actually a male mentor, gave me the opportunity to be a project manager on the first ever women's standalone freestyle tournament. And I did this, and it made the little girl inside of me who loved playing football want to play football again. I got to watch Women's Champions League live for the first time. And I went home and told my sister I wanted to play Champions League again, and I was going to do it. She said she'd be the first person in the stands watching me, and of course I could do it. The next day, my fairy godmother was watching over me because I sat next to the sporting director of Paris Saint-Germain, another male, who after, this story is much longer, but I will really break it down. After convincing him that I should be on the team, I don't know how, he offered me a dual role as a player on the women's team and working in the sponsorship department, so I could continue to build my CV and progress in the business side of the game, which is where my career was going. I'm too old to be playing anymore, for me personally. So I was able to develop both skills, be a team player with my team, but also help them off the field by bringing in standalone sponsors and developing that aspect of my game. And that was definitely because of the mentors and the people who had helped me along the way and showed me that women, we can be players and we can work and we can do 1,001 things because we're great at multitasking. And more players and clubs and stakeholders should take the opportunity to use their players who understand the game and can learn about the business side and start to develop it. So I think that answers most of the question.
Wicked, that was fascinating. I mean, amazing. And some really common themes that are emerging from the speakers in terms of that tenacity and that resilience and that ability to keep going and not just, you know, fall at any hurdles. And you know, that came out a lot in terms of what you've just talked about there with playing and then not playing and then going back in. And one thing that really struck me as well, and it was like you'd read my questions even though you've not seen them, was this notion around allies and male allies in particular, because I can relate to you for your experiences quite a lot, and personally having some fantastic male allies that have really supported and championed me and pushed me to believe maybe when sometimes, you know, your confidence is low, and that absolutely sounds the same with you. I'm really interested in where you have sort of experienced females maybe not being as supportive or questioning more. How did you deal with that? Did that feel just like that was the norm in terms of playing circles, or were other players that you played alongside experiencing similar kind of, I guess, stereotypes from females around them?
Absolutely, and it's funny because it was different stereotypes in different places, ironically enough, depending. So being a foreigner, So it's an outsider, even though it's not necessarily the color of my skin. I was still different. I didn't speak the language the way they wanted. I didn't have the same culture how they wanted. I didn't have the same sexuality that they expected me to fall under. But yeah, there was definitely always women who were on my team. Not always, but there was a minority of us that maybe could come together. Or I also found a lot of friends and allies outside the game and off the field to look at it. And that was really important for me to develop a community off the field that I could speak to and talk to, and sort of similar to what Women in Football does is create a community outside of your workplace so you can discuss these things and build off of them. And sometimes we all know that stereotypes and the bias it's not necessarily malice, it's just ignorance and not understanding the truth or what really happens. And I think these things are important for us to discuss and explain. And then I think the biggest one too is being a woman and what that actually means, and why women are actually asked questions that you would never ask a man outside of football, whether it's a woman or a man asking these questions. But nobody would ever ask a man when they're going to become a father, or when they're going to be married, or why aren't they, or do they want to be. They would just talk about the job or talk about football. And I think it should be the same with women. If we want to discuss our significant others or our desire or not desire to become mothers, then that's okay either way, rather than the expectation that we have to want that or we need to want that. That's a personal thing that I'm personally dealing with right now, and I think it's something that we need to be more conscious of.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. And actually, I have a number of friends in different industries, all connected to sport in some way, actually, but who say the same sorts of things. It's that whole, it's almost like, you know, if you run a 10K and then someone says, are you going to do a half marathon? And you do your half marathon and someone says, you're going to do a marathon. It's almost like, you know, you get engaged when you're getting married, when you're having a family. You know, there's just this constant, I think, societal pressure, actually, of people asking questions, and they're not helpful in many instances at all. Thank you so much for sharing your personal journey there. It's really, really very interesting. The chat is open. We've got lots of questions and we have 14 minutes, slightly less. So I'm going to get straight to it. So we have one question from Danielle Shields, who is asking, what is the best piece of advice you've received on your career journey? And maybe if I add to that, you know, the kind of thing that you would offer to a young woman coming into the football industry. So maybe if I ask each of you, Ebru, you are not on mute, so I'm coming to you first.
Now I turned it on so that we use the time most efficiently. I'm actually gonna say a very unusual one, but as women, I think we really fear rejection and failure, and that puts an extra strain on us. And I was told, after being not given a position that I had applied for and inquired extensively about the reasons, I was told, well, you need to learn to be a better loser, which at the time made me extremely angry. But when you think about it, it is quite true, because at that point in time, you can't really change the decision. But if you're not a good loser, you're actually killing yourself thinking about, you know, what went wrong. So for me, that really worked out quite well. Of course, I'm curious about why I wasn't, you know, given a certain position or whatever, but at least I'm not killing myself over it anymore. So it was just simply to learn to lose gracefully.
Great, a great point. Simone, what would be your sort of best piece of advice, do you think?
My dad's got a recurring theme in this conversation, but he always said to me, be nice to people on the way up the ladder, because you don't know who you'll meet on the way down. And I've just kind of lived by that. And I'd say the same to anyone, I guess anyone really, just, and particularly kind of young people wanting to work in football. Just be yourself, be really genuine and authentic. And because I've very recently done a Women in Football leadership course, I can give some advice about, you know, kind of promoting yourself from a brand perspective, networking and being very visible on social media, just being really focused. And yeah, I think genuine is what I would say more than anything, because whilst it's good to be very visible in networking on social media, it's authenticity, I think, is really key, and people can kind of tell authenticity quite quickly.
I think that's a really valid point. Ariana, can I come to you next?
Yes, I have a couple. One is something a coach told me when I was in university about making football saves, actually, as a goalkeeper. It doesn't have to be pretty, it has to be effective. And I think that can cross over to a lot of things. And especially as women, we think that it has to be perfect in order for it to get across the line or for get people to pay attention to us. And that's not really true. It just needs to be right and it needs to be effective. And be crazily stubborn and don't listen to people. And people are going to say a lot of stuff, whether you do something good or you do something bad. They're going to talk no matter what. So just do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, hear the things that you need to hear and don't be bogged down in the things that you don't. Sarah, what would be the advice that you would either give or the best advice you've been given?
Always represent yourself well, always dress well, network as much as you can, and just keep going. You know, keep going in your life. You'll go up a lot of avenues that will be cul-de-sacs, and that's fine. Just reverse back down, get back on the road and go where you want to go. Just never give up. Reach out to people on this panel, reach out to the other people in this group, network away, do your best, don't give up on your dream.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And again, such important key messages. Sarah, I'm going to stick with you for a moment if I can. Your role at TalkSport really around changing the face of the station in many ways, and that output, and really diversifying. There are lots of women in big jobs at TalkSport now. How proud are you of that, and what difference is that making to your listeners?
Actually, that ties in with the question that Marissa's posted in as well about disruptors of the industry and challenging what exists and bringing innovation and new ideas. So I'm glad you've come to me for that one. I kind of just told a story about the discrimination that still exists in offices, and I didn't tell the full story, in that I was actually stood with my manager there, and he addressed the issue. I'm saying it still exists in places. He addressed the issue, and actually that's the whole point. Is I think when you're going to be a disruptor and when you're going to challenge, then you have to have supporters and allies. And what I've been able to do is because of the amazing support that I have here at TalkSport. I have 2 male bosses, and the commitment and the passion that they give to me is second to none. So I think that's really, I'm really lucky with that. And I think that women in football is also that. So actually, for people who are starting out, going into a workplace and maybe thinking, wow, how am I going to combat that? Then you do that by joining Women in Football. You do that by joining a group or a network that can help you. So that's kind of my advice is, don't put up with it, but be in a safe place in order to challenge it. So at TalkSport, we've been so lucky because I've got female managers. We've got some strong female presenters. Laura Woods on breakfast, that change that we made, 20 odd years of a male presenting breakfast, and then we bring in Laura Woods in the middle of a lockdown. That was a big, brave, hard change for the business. And Laura Woods has been through a lot, and so proud of her. She won Presenter of the Year, 2nd year running at the SJA's Sports Journalism's Award. And do you know what? I've had late night phone calls with that lady. We have a few chats. She likes to challenge, but she's in a really, not delicate, delicate's not the right word, but an exposed place. And she's representing and she's challenging. So you've got to have the people supportive around you. I know I get the feeling from my 2 bosses, they have daughters. And whenever we talk about women, I can see it going through their eyes about, this could be my daughter. What do I do to change this for my daughter? And I'm happy with that. I'm more than happy with that, because they've put key people in place like me to go, right. And when it gets hard for me and I might shed a few tears out of frustration or whatever, they're there for me. And I'm like, I can go and facilitate change because they're enabling me to do it. So you need allies and enablers.
I think absolutely. I would wholeheartedly. I think we'd all agree with that, and we've all got people that we can kind of relate to in that way. Ebru, you talked about kind of, or you've illustrated that vulnerability, and things don't always go the way that you would like for reasons either within your control or outside of that. And I think there is a danger sometimes as women, you know, we talk about the really good stuff and people say, oh, you're a superwoman, you're doing this and you're doing that, and all of these things are absolutely amazing, and yes, but equally we'll all have made mistakes in our careers as well, and things that we've learned from. So I always like to speak to people about the best mistake that you've made, and by that I mean the thing that you've learned the most from. That again, it's like pearls of wisdom that we can share with our audience. So is there anything that sort of springs to mind there, Ebru, that you would be willing to share?
There's one that I share when I'm teaching negotiation, actually, in our leadership courses. I'll be very quick about it, but back in 2008, when I was building the stadium, we also signed the largest ever sponsorship deal. It was 10 plus 5 years, a total of $150 million. And it turns out, long story short, in the extension years, we had made a mistake, actually, and only rather than an additional amount, it was actually going down in the last 5 years, which was a huge blow, because on the back of that, we were financing the stadium and the merger of our companies. And I said, okay, if I can't fix this one, I'm probably going to be hung upside down, you know, from the stadium by the president, the board, and the fans and everything. And I went to the CEO of Turk Telecom and I said, look, you have every right to reject. This is what we had discussed, but I would appreciate if you can consider a revision. And he looked at me and he said, look, you've been such a collaborative negotiator that I will fix this for you. But had you been, you know, a very aggressive, you know, woman working on this transaction, maybe I wouldn't have done it. And that was, for me, probably a huge mistake with a good learning, but a little bit maybe similar to Simone's. I think we can go so much farther if we are not necessarily too aggressive, although we sometimes tend to think that in order to be accepted, we have to be very aggressive, but that is not the case. Collaboration and being a problem solver is a very important one. So that mistake was a huge one, probably could have cost my life, but it turned out to be, you know, fine in the end.
Yeah. I think that speaks to that notion of humility and authenticity as well, which Simone touched upon before, and being genuinely you. And I think people see through that if you try. We all have our conscious selves and our subconscious selves, don't we? And you know, we might dial that up a little bit or not. But if you go too far from that, people do see through it. And I'm a firm believer in that. People do business with people they like in good times and particularly in bad. And that really shone through in the pandemic as well, I think. So I think that it's a fantastic point. Is there anybody else on the panel who has kind of a best fail to kind of learn from? And just for people who are watching, our panelists are able to stay for a few extra minutes. So we'll keep going maybe at the maximum till 10 past, but possibly just before. So just to give you a heads up on that one. Simone.
I don't mind sharing a failure story that I think it's true what Yvettes says. You can't beat yourself up too much when things happen and go over and over. But it was quite early on in my career. So probably, I think even pre-children, so before 2003, and the issue of the lack of gay male players was ever prevalent, as it still is and remains, and is such an anyway, so I won't go talk about now. So it was back then, and I'd done a survey, I think, just quite naively and just kind of speaking to players, and a journalist had got wind of it and spoke to me on the phone about it. And I kind of said, well, no, the thing is that players don't really want to talk about it because they don't want to put their head above the parapet. That's what I said. Just had a conversation, carried on talking, put the phone down, went about my life, and then like the phone rang like 11 o'clock at night, and it was my CEO saying, what have you said? Your front page of the Times, players won't stick their head up. And you know, when you're just like, So that was, for me, a mistake and a failing that I have lived by forevermore, which is I really can't speak to journalists without feeling really kind of aware that everything that I say could easily be misconstrued and taken out of context. So yes, equally, I'm not good when it's important for me as well not to kind of make assumptions and be rash. So those are kind of equal kind of feelings that I've learned to live by. But hopefully that will help make people wary of journalists. Sarah, I hope you don't take offence.
Absolutely. Just on the point of, obviously we've looked at this in the context of different people's roles, and also Ariana from kind of that professional athlete perspective, and you, Simone, with the players that the PFA represent and engage and support. How do we move to break the bias in terms of grassroots football? You know, we're seeing the growth of participation from females, and particularly young girls. You know, I think girls football is the fastest growing sport in this country, which is incredible and amazing. But lots of the people on the sidelines that are watching will still have a view. Has anybody kind of got any thoughts on that sort of notion of, at the grassroots level, how do we stop the bias around girls playing football and they shouldn't be playing, or young female referees never get an easy time, do they, at the best of times? But if you're, you know, a young person, particularly a young girl, trying to referee, and you've got heated debate on the sideline, that's tricky. Does anybody have a thought on that? Maybe Ariana? Or
Yeah, I have one. I can comment. For me, I think it's changing now, but for so long in women's football, we did what we do in all sports, and we want to shrink it and pink it, and we want to make women's football just for women and just for girls and just for families. And I don't believe this is the way. We need little boys to see women playing it. And one of the coolest commercials I think I've ever seen was actually one of my fellow players on PSG in Chile. They did a commercial about a little boy who comes home and he's crying to his dad because the boys on the playground were making fun of him for wearing a Chile jersey. And the last name on the back was a woman and not a male player. And his dad explained to him that it's the crest on the front that makes a difference, not the name on the back. And that the name on the back should be any national team player. It doesn't have to be male or female. And so I think that we're doing a disservice if we focus grassroots only on girls. We have to change the conversation for those little boys to understand that they can support the women and they could want to score a goal like Alex Morgan or Steph Houghton in England or whoever that may be. And little girls can support boys and little boys can support the women and vice versa. And I think when those little boys start being like, oh my God, girls can play, they're going to be more open to those little girls in the park wanting to play with them, just like everybody else. And then I think you just have to keep encouraging little girls and let them understand that they can play and they can love the game. And especially at a grassroots level, I think we also need to stop trying to focus. Making the national team for any country is so amazing. And it's a huge honor to play. And I've been lucky to do that. But that's a very few amount of people, and everybody can play football. And we don't have to aspire to be professional players in order to want to play. And I think sometimes in women's football, we focus too much on this because there's not an opportunity of a grassroots for women. And there's not an opportunity just to go out and kick the ball around and have fun. And so I think if we focus on these things, girls will be happier to play if they don't have to be the best on the field to try to become professional.
Absolutely, I think that's a really interesting point that you make there. And you know, football is for everybody, and rightly so. I'm just going to take one more question. So there's a question on here around for maybe women who are looking to get into the football business but don't necessarily have a footballing related degree. What would you recommend to them to kind of change careers or enter this industry? Who would like to take that?
I'll start. I mean, I think I didn't have a degree in sports, or I was not a football player, so that is definitely not a prerequisite at all. I think what's important is there is such a wide range of job possibilities in the football industry. And whatever job there's a woman doing it somewhere in the world. So whatever your expertise area is or whatever you have studied, there is a corresponding position within football or around football, whether it's a marketing agency or a media outlet or law firms. So for sure, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to break in the first instance, but we have a wonderful service as Women in Football. We post any level of jobs that we come across. And it is a very, very important resource, I think, for anyone who's trying to break into the industry. And that would be a good way to start looking. And then, as Simone mentioned, our leadership courses are also preparing you better for challenges in the industry and also helping you build the network. Therefore, that is a great, next learning and self-development opportunity as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ebru. So I'm afraid that is all we've got time for today. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Sarah, Ariana, Simone, and of course, Ebru for such honest insights. The chat has gone wild. I think we could easily be here for another hour, but sadly not. But yeah, thank you so much for that. I think the things that have really stood out for me listening to you all is own your space. So, be really good at what you do and know that. I think that's massive. There are amazing women on the webinar and in our audience and as our members and beyond, and actually we're good at what we do, so we shouldn't be shy of that, and let's let our work kind of do the talking. I think for us as Women in Football, there's a massive role to play in terms of just opening up the industry and also helping females to be more aware of the variety of roles that exist within the football industry, be that in clubs or actually organisations that support the industry as well. I think this notion of, I think Ebru, it was yourself that raised it, be a great influencer. Everyone's commented on about the network, own the network. Actually, you have to invest in your network as well. This isn't just a case of it's going to be open up. People will support you if you ask for help, but invest in that network as you would a CPD course. I think, Sarah, you referenced this term look a number of times, and I understand why, but actually the audience are talking about, yes, we understand this notion of luck, but actually the tenacity, the resilience, this perseverance, like luck, preparation, meeting opportunity, that, these things don't just happen by accident to people. So I think that's something that often we relate to that. Actually, you've crafted those opportunities as well, which is brilliant. There are so many roles, as Ebru has mentioned, and Women in Football, we're here to serve our members, absolutely, and we'll continue to build and work with the industry to post opportunities, to create new training opportunities and programs to basically help keep this progress moving. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the webinar today. Please let us know on our socials. If you've got ideas for future webinars, then again, they'll be continuing alongside our in-person events. So drop us an email, drop us a DM. We'd love to hear that. Our next webinar is actually on the 26th of April. There's information coming soon to our website, but it's all going to be themed around celebrating our football writers and football writing. So that's really exciting and very different to stuff that we've done before. We have our Be Inspired inaugural conference, which is supported by Barclays next week. Super excited about that. It's actually massively oversubscribed. So if you're going to be there, I can't wait to meet you. Please say hello to me on the day. I'd love to meet more of our members. If you're not able to join us, don't worry. We're going to film all of the sessions and it'll be available on our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We know your time is precious and we really do appreciate it. Thank you for your engagement in the chat. It's brilliant. I love to see that. You've got a great webinar when you've got that chat box going off the hook. So super thankful to that. Have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future event. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you. Bye, everybody.